All right. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matthew Klinsky. I'm one of the senior management consultants here at Doctors Management. And every month we focus on an educational topic that you guys have requested that we've discussed in our client interactions. And this topic is really exciting because it's at the beginning of the year and we always have those challenges with job descriptions, raises, KPIs, who's working, who's not working. And so who other than Trevor McElhaney, our Director of Consulting, will be here joining and doing the webinar for us to learn how we go through those job descriptions and KPIs. So I'm honored to have Trevor join as the co-host today and the presenter for the webinar. Trevor, if you don't mind, go ahead and give yourself a little introduction and we can jump right into it.
That sounds good. Thank you, Matt. Thanks everybody for joining today. Like Matt said, my name is Trevor. I'm the Director of Consulting at Doctors Management. Matt and I work together with the rest of our team of consultants in a lot of different areas in medical practices that you probably know a little bit about, and maybe not. If not, feel free to jump on our website to kind of learn a little bit about everything that we do. As Matt said, for this particular, let's say, half hour or so, we're going to dive deeply into job descriptions. We're going to look deeply at KPIs and how those things intersect, and hopefully walk away with some good takeaways. And then we'll also look forward to seeing everybody back for the workshop in a couple of weeks. So thank you, Matt. Thank you, Eliza, also on our team here, helping us keep everything straight. And then thank you guys for spending part of your afternoon with us. And like Matt said, please give us feedback. Also, too, if you have any questions, you can throw them in the chat. We'll stop at the end of each topic and hopefully get to one or two of those as we keep things moving. But we want this to be short enough that you can get your afternoon back, but also take a few little snippets away with you. So with that in mind, the agenda for today is the first topic on the agenda is really looking at the benefits of those clear job descriptions. So I think what we'll see is why those job descriptions matter a little bit more than what conventional wisdom may have told us at times as we look at what those truly represent. The second piece here is then moving into more role-specific KPIs. So not departmental, not vague, not practice-wide, but what we want to talk through today is looking down to the ownership of that KPI. Who's the person in the practice who we know is responsible ultimately for achieving those particular outcomes? Then we'll move into defining a little bit deeper about what those KPIs can actually represent, and maybe a little bit of a different way to look at it than you may have previously, breaking those out between what are activities that we're measuring versus truly the outcomes that flow from those activities. And then finally, we'll look at something that's a little buzzwordy, but I think it's really important, is creating a culture of what we call continuous improvement. So really all that's saying is how are we using this data that we're compiling, and how are we using these expectations among our team to then continue to get better and better and grow as a practice, and ultimately make it a better place to work and a more productive facility. So with that said, we'll jump straight into the first topic, which, as we said, was the benefit of those clear job descriptions. So I want to start off with something that may be a little bit different than what you may think. At Doctors Management, we have practices that call us weekly for a myriad of problems. Some of those problems aren't as bad as what they think. Some are pretty dire. Other practices call us and say, hey, things are pretty good, but ultimately we'd like to know how we could do things better. And almost without fail, 95% of those practices that we talk to aren't operationally broken. They have all the pieces in place. They have the staff, they have the equipment, they have the facility, they have the physicians that are very dialed in. But what they do have is very unclear operations. They have a lot of people that aren't really clear what they're supposed to be doing. Some of the things that we obviously constantly hear, everybody's very busy. My staff is working really hard. We just can't keep up. I think we need 2 more FTEs here or 2 more FTEs there. But I think we all know, as leaders in practices, CEOs, managers, not sure what the makeup on the call is today, excuse me, but busyness is hardly ever the same thing as effectiveness. So working harder simply doesn't fix those operational problems or gaps that we may have. And so a couple of points there. If we don't clearly define one, who owns a particular function, and this goes all the way down to what has historically been considered some of the lower levels of a practice by job description. We've got to make sure we're clearly defining what does that person own, not simply the list of tasks that they're responsible for. What they are responsible for is obviously important, and then helping them look at and define what success looks like in that particular role with real numbers, not simply the ability to check off a lot of those tasks that we've defined. Sometimes we then see if we don't have those problems clearly defined, then we're kind of back to relying on these heroic efforts from the few, right? We've got 2 or 3 people on the team that are just putting in a massive amount of work while the rest of the team may be simply getting by. People are trying harder, they're staying later, they're hustling, but the underlying system just doesn't improve. So job descriptions plus the KPIs that we're going to associate with them, they close what we consider the execution gap, which is truly that space between the effort we're putting in and what results are truly coming from that effort. So hopefully we can start to build a framework around that as we move forward. So here's kind of why those job descriptions matter more than you think, and even for us as consultants potentially have historically viewed job descriptions. Sometimes a little bit more like HR paperwork. Well, we got to have a job description for this. They kind of want to know what it is before they want to sign on to working with us or how much they're going to get paid. And so we viewed them historically as just these operational contracts. You do this for me and I pay you for those things. But unfortunately, that's a little bit backwards. That job description isn't simply an HR document. It's an operational contract that we want to answer really what leads to 4 critical questions. And the first question, which may seem obvious, and in some cases it is, but why does this role exist in the first place? Have we defined why this role exists? Some are obviously more obvious than others. Front desk, we got to have somebody answering phone calls. We have to have people who are taking referrals and making sure those end up on our schedule. Others can be a little bit more nebulous. So we want to know, why does this exist in our practice? The second piece, and this is the one that I think that most practices or businesses in general are pretty bad at. And it's, what does this role actually own? What do they control? And what are they ultimately held responsible and accountable for? Third, going right into that one that connects up to the first 2, which is, what decisions can this role make? We want to hire people that we trust their subjective decision making within a certain framework, but we also want to let them know, hey, this is where we want you to have a little bit of autonomy, whether it's through leadership or whether it's through strategy or whether it's through the actual objective decision making. What decisions is this role allowed to make without direct permission or direct oversight? And then the fourth one, and arguably the most important, is, how do we know if this role is successful? How do we know if this individual in this particular role is truly a successful role and truly moving the practice forward? And so when job descriptions are weak, then a few obvious things can happen. I know that everybody on this call can relate. Responsibility gets really fuzzy. There can be some excuses. There can be some passing of the buck, so to speak. Workflows vary by person. We've got one person doing something a certain way, someone else doing it another. And then when we try to add KPIs on top of that, they feel very arbitrary, if not punitive. And so eventually you hear things like, this wasn't my job. I didn't know I was supposed to do that. That's not really in my control, any number of things. And those are all symptoms of unclear role design. So like we said, that those weaker job descriptions lead to a lot of confusion and a lot of inconsistency down the line. And so then we move into, what are then those key elements of an effective job description? And those right back to those questions we were attempting to answer. So what is the core purpose of this role? We need to be able to define it, and we need to be able to communicate it directly to that individual. Second, what are the primary responsibilities? And I think sometimes we as professionals and leaders, we want to kind of laundry list that list of things that we're ultimately expecting them to do. And then we include that big disclaimer that says other duties as assigned. And so we end up with this thing. And in reality, what happens there is we probably only have those individuals focused on 2 or 3 things. And so what we want to do is try to distill that down and figure out what exactly that role is going to be then responsible for. Like we discussed, decision-making authority. There's something that happens to our teams when we give them some power to use their minds, to be empowered by owning something. So we got to decide, what can this person do without constant hand-holding or constant kind of what we call micromanagement? What are we willing to let that person take control of? And if we don't trust that person to take control of things, do we truly have the right individual in the right role? And then finally, how do we measure the expected outcomes associated with that role? So what results must exist for us as leaders to say, this is the right person and this is the right role. We defined it well and we're making progress there, not just on that role, but in the practice in general. So if we can't really articulate those outcomes, we don't really have a role. Then we go back to that laundry list and say, what we really have is just someone who's performing this list of things and not really a role within the practice in the bigger picture. So that's topic one. That's kind of a quick deep dive into how we go about structuring those job descriptions and making them effective. Before we go into topic two, do we have any questions, or Matt, certainly if you had anything to add there, feel free.
Trevor, I think you hit it right on the head. The practices that have those well-defined job descriptions typically don't have the same problems that the practices that don't have those job descriptions do. And in fact, the ones that don't, those are kind of those opportunities to really create an efficiency in your practice very quickly with no investment except for your time. But defining those job expectations will also allow the employees to know that they're meeting your needs as a supervisor. If you're a practice manager or office manager, that job insecurity can be really go a long way for them to leave really quickly. But if they know they're meeting your needs and expectations, if they know that they're owning a piece of that responsibility, they're more likely to stick around, is what I found.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Eliza, are there any questions that we need to
No other questions?
address?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. We'll hop into topic two then. This is getting into the role-specific KPI piece, and I know KPIs have been around for decades. We all talk about them. We all have them in our practice. We're all tracking our charges, payments, and adjustments. We're all tracking our net collections ratio, our AR buckets, all those things. But what we're talking about today are those KPIs that are tied to very specific roles in the practice. And I want to be clear, when we say specific roles, we're not even talking about departments, and we're not even talking about full teams. We're talking about individuals within those teams and what they're ultimately responsible for. And I think it's important to realize, and you've probably seen this in your own practices, that departments, let's say revenue cycle, or let's say front desk, or let's say clinical team, departments don't change behavior. Departments don't represent a brain and a body and someone who's showing up to work every day. It's the people within that department or within that team that do change their behavior, good or bad, based on the incentives or the ownership that they've been allowed to have. So a couple of things own that. And not to be too cliche here, but when someone owns a KPI, when someone knows this is the number that at the end of the month or end of the quarter, someone is ultimately going to hold me responsible for, at the very least knowing what it is, and then on further from that, whether it's increased, decreased, or stayed the same, I think someone wakes up or at least drives to work caring about that piece of the business. They think, this is mine, and I know I'm tied to it. And I truly care about how I can affect this piece of it. Someone notices when it moves. They're following it. They know when our ratio went from 8 to 4 and potentially why that was. They adjust their behavior because of that. So when we think about aligning those KPIs with the specific job roles, what we're really saying is we have the responsibilities in the job description and the decisions that person can actually influence. So what we want to see is not just a list of tasks, but those things that person can truly take ownership of and they can move. So if someone can't, if I said to Matt, hey, Matt, with your role at Doctor's Manager, I'd like you to own this particular metric. Well, if he has no real control over influencing that metric, then we've created a really bad KPI because he feels powerless. he feels without any ownership whatsoever, and ultimately that's going to cause some pretty bad downstream effects.
Yeah.
So when we look at the role specific KPIs, when they don't have clear ownership, and I know we've all sat through meetings where, and even some that I've probably ran, so Matt can call me on this. We look at charts and we look at graphs and we look at all these things and we maybe nod our head along and we say, that's interesting, but I don't know what we do with that. Do we ignore it? Do we act upon it? I do know for certainty when those KPIs lack clear ownership, accountability absolutely breaks down. There is no accountability. No one really decides that this is for me to take control of. Metrics are reviewed, but not acted upon, as we stated, and performance simply stagnates. We then look for the E word, those excuses about who was supposed to be doing something, because it certainly wasn't me. It wasn't my responsibility, but I'll help you track down who was supposed to do it. So the problem isn't typically tracking in any of the practices we work with. It's the ownership of who actually can influence and who is ultimately accountable for moving those numbers down the field. And so before we jump into the different types of metrics that we'll look at, Matt, anything you'd like to add or any questions that may have popped up?
Well, I think the one thing that you may have touched on quickly was, one of the challenges I'm sure you guys have is this person performing well? And it might only have one front desk, or maybe you have two front desk people, and which one is doing better? And using what Trevor was just saying, using KPIs that they individually own to measure that is one of the objective ways you can determine if someone's a good fit for the practice and if they're a good fit for the role. But even if you had 5 or 6 front desk people, you can still use those KPIs in a way that benefits you from an operational standpoint. But while also pushing the needle, I think we're going to talk a little bit about how do you make the front desk even better? How do you raise the bar, which I think Trevor is going to touch base on next. So, or maybe number 4.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Matt. So topic 3, like we outlined at the beginning, this is breaking down the difference in those metrics. So KPIs, high level, like we discussed, we probably all have a very similar package within each of your practices that you're tracking and you're following. But I want to draw a distinction here between what metrics are considered more activity tracking and those metrics that are truly outcome tracking. So this is where a lot of organizations, both in healthcare and otherwise, truly get stuck because they're measuring activity, and activity makes us feel good because, again, it goes back to being busy. We feel like people are working hard, but we don't necessarily define what is that actually doing to our outcomes within the practice. So like we stated, again, just stating it here, the job description itself defines what the role is responsible for, but then those KPIs define how we're going to measure the success or failure of that particular role and the person in it, frankly. So a strong KPI framework then ensures, number one, that each major responsibility, so think through your practice and think through all those things that have to happen between Monday at 8 a.m., 7 a.m. for some of you, all the way till 5 or 6 o'clock on Friday, even on the weekends at times. Does every one of those major buckets have at least one measurable outcome to it? Sometimes outcomes you probably never even considered. Are we able to know that that particular piece of our practice is running really well, or at least better than it used to by our own kind of internal benchmarking? The second piece there is making sure that the KPIs reflect the results of the things that we're doing and not just the task that we're being tasked with. And we'll dive into kind of what that means on a couple of slides moving forward. And then it also, to Matt's earlier point, really make sure that those performance expectations are explicit and objective. I think we've all sat in reviews, some of us probably on the being reviewed side, some of us on the reviewing side, probably for most of us, a lot of both, where we're hearing a lot of things about, well, this didn't happen or that didn't happen. And we're faced with the tough call to say, I truly had no idea that was the expectation of this role because it hadn't been communicated. So if we can get to a point where those are explicit, they're written down, they're objective, and we're following them, it's very empowering for the staff and very powerful for the managers that are leading those teams. So if we look at some of the examples then of alignment on the differences between activity and outcome based, what we're really saying is this. So if one of our key responsibilities is patient follow-up, extremely important in our practices, it's getting harder and harder and harder to have the staff needed to make sure in a timely fashion we're following up with patients, we're following up with referrals. A KPI there, and we'll talk about what a bad KPI there is, but a good KPI is truly the follow-up completion rate. So the KPI there isn't, this is the number of calls we made, because that's one that we may track and say, well, we made 100 calls this week. Well, from that, we don't really know if 100 calls were 100 wasted moments in that practice, or at said better, 100 unsuccessful follow-ups. So we may get to feeling really good about the amount of calls we made, but what does that mean for a follow-up completion rate? Did we get that individual from voicemail to on the schedule? Next responsibility may be something like scheduling efficiency. The KPI there isn't necessarily this is the amount of appointments we scheduled. I think for most healthy practices out there, we've got 4 to 6 week backlogs on new patients and follow-up. So with any kind of base level of work, we're going to get the provider schedules full, assuming there's not some kind of operational hurdle there. So it's not really were you scheduled out on your template. The real KPI there is how long did it take us to get from that referral to getting it on the schedule. Finally, the third one here, and there's a million different examples of these, but we see this in a lot of kind of middle manager type roles, is your responsibility is operational oversight. Well, what the heck does that mean? We've been guilty of saying that you're responsible for operational oversight. The KPI isn't, does the team seem generally happy and they show up on time? The KPI there is, what's our active patient volume? What's our utilization rate by provider? If the provider said, I want to see 30 a day, how are we tracking that? And how are we saying this is what you were utilized each week of the month, each week of the quarter, to make sure that we're tracking that appropriately? Then we can say, operationally, manager, you're doing a really good job of managing your team to make sure these things are happening appropriately. So then pivoting back to just kind of the dichotomy between activity metrics and outcome metrics. Activity metrics, like we said, those are just measuring motion. Did you do something or did you not do something? Calls made, appointments scheduled, patients seen. They're really easy to track and they're really easy to trend, but they don't really tell you if your system's working. High activity, tons of calls being made, tons of referrals being, quote, worked, with poor outcomes really doesn't move the ball down the field at all. So like we said, they measure the effort or volume, and they're often pretty easy to track, but they don't necessarily drive the results, as opposed to outcome metrics, which do measure the impact and effectiveness of those KPIs we've instituted, directly influence performance and behavior. So if I go into my quarterly review with my manager and they say, hey, we're consistently missing this bucket, help me understand your role. Help me understand some of those hurdles you're facing, because I see you working and I see you working hard. Mm-hmm. Let's collaborate on where those hurdles may be. Maybe you tell me it's technology. Maybe you tell me it's another practice that we get a ton of referrals from, and they're not using the format that makes it easier for us to do. And you've been brute forcing these things through. So it opens up those conversations we can have, not as a punitive measure, but as a proactive measure to say in real time, let's figure out why these KPIs aren't performing the way we would like. And it just better aligns the business and clinical goals. And I should have also added there the individual goals of each of your employees. Mm-hmm. I think absent something, let's say the 90% of our employee group, they want to do a really good job. And they're working in healthcare. So they're already showing they have a real willingness to work in a tough environment. So having that feedback and having those collaboration opportunities, I think is really important. Again, some of those examples there, which we discussed, no-shows and cancellation rates, active patient counts, referral to appointment conversion, and utilization ratios, again, much more impactful than simply looking at the activity tracked. So a couple of examples too here. If staff know that they're measured on conversion rate, there's a chance that they may change how they're talking to patients when they call them to make that appointment. They may go just a little bit above and beyond to accommodate their needs as to the schedule. They may circle back with a provider and say, hey, doctor, I've got this patient and they really need to see you. You don't have any slots. Can I double you up? Instead of simply saying, I'm sorry, ma'am or sir, you may have to go somewhere else if it's truly that urgent. If they're measured on a no-show rate, they may change the confirmation process. We may get an idea from somebody at the front that says, hey, I think we got to add another phone call. 24 hours out, nobody wants to do it. Nobody feels like we should have to do it, but we may just have to start calling them to confirm the appointment. Maybe, doctor, we got to add some more technology into the practice. We got to send out confirmation reminders, and we got to force them to confirm yes. Any number of things there, but it creates that open dialogue when they know ultimately they're going to be responsible for what those numbers say. So that was topic 3. Matt, anything additional, or do we have any questions?
No questions yet. Let's see. One question. It didn't come through. JV, if you can rewrite that question, only part of it came through. So we'll just wait for JV.
I was just about to reply to that. Thank you, Matt.
But Trevor, you ended on like one of the most important things that I love talking about with my practices, which is really allowing the team member to really own it, what you mentioned in the beginning, but then get creative about how to fix that number, because everybody likes to show that they're improving in some way, shape, or form. And that goes to all the practice managers on the call. When you're reporting, having those outcome-based measurements to report to the owners of the practice, so the doctors you work for, that is, you're going to boost yourself up. You're going to get creative yourself. And the same thing happens with everybody on your team. Is getting creative sometimes doesn't mean that you have to pay them 50 more cents an hour. It just means you have to give them something to be proud of, something to own. And those kind of easy wins start popping just by changing the way they talk to patients or approaching it. So I've seen that happen more times than not.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt. Did that question happen to come in, or you want me to keep moving?
Yeah, let's just keep going.
Okay. So topic 4, and this one will be a little bit shorter, a little bit more subjective, but again, the whole purpose of any of this, 1, let's make the business better, but let's also get our team kind of focused on this idea that we're all here, we all have ownership of very key areas, and we want to continue to improve that, even if it's marginal improvement, as long as we're continuing to do that. And when job descriptions and KPIs work together, they do create at least a framework by which people can join in and say, hey, I understand completely what my role is. I understand what it's going to take. And then I can go from there. So just keeping in mind that when we think about job descriptions versus KPIs, the job description simply defines the lane that I or Matt or Eliza, anybody on this call, that's the lane that we're in at that time. And that's ultimately what we're responsible for doing. Those KPIs define how fast can we make that car run, or how well can we make sure we stay in that lane. So I think that if you just kind of keep that mental framework together and then know that together those things are going to create this culture that requires continuous improvement, because it's going to be very, very evident on a monthly or quarterly basis as to whether that improvement is occurring. I also want to make this distinction that when we've instituted these types of roles and practices, we don't find that people are scared of this. I think it's significantly more empowering to them, because maybe for the first time in their life, they've got a role where, say, I have this objective metric that I truly own and I can truly make an impact on. And if I choose not to, or I don't do my job well, there's downstream effects to that. And so it's very empowering. They establish that role, purpose, responsibilities, and decision-making authority, as we've discussed. Finally, those KPIs then translate those expectations into measurable outcomes, objective performance signals, and actionable feedback. Again, the job description just tells us generally what would success look like, and then the KPIs look at how is this success actually measured and improved. The continuous improvement, again, going back to my earlier comment, is not about pressure per se. It's just about clarity. It's about feedback, and it's about iteration, the ability to do the same thing over and over and over again and improving each time. And then when the roles and KPIs are clear, probably very welcome for you managers on the call. those performance discussions become very objective. There may be a subjective component to it, right? You've not been showing up as on time as you should, or maybe you're doing those things, but for the most part, it becomes very objective. This is your role. It's either kind of stayed the same, it's gotten worse, or it's gotten better. And those adjustments, if any, that we need to make moving forward, are completely data driven. They're not emotional. This is not about I saw you on your cell phone and that's why you didn't do a good job. This is, hey, we're maybe not doing a good job. We are doing a good job because I can clearly see here year over year, our referral to completion rate has been reduced by 3 days, and we're getting people in quicker. We're keeping schedules fuller. We're making more calls and follow-ups and getting those people into the practice. And from there, improvement just becomes expected and normalized. This is no longer something that feels punitive, or we're shifting a conversation from who dropped the ball here. It's simply what's the data telling us. And in a lot of cases, it tells us that, hey, we set the bar too high, or we had unrealistic expectations, but only through those conversations are we going to come to that conclusion. So again, it's very empowering for our teams, but also very empowering for our managers. The three big pieces here, like we discussed: clarity, ownership, and transparency. Extremely important as you're evaluating these roles within your practice. Extremely important as you evaluate these KPIs. We want our staff to know very specifically what success looks like in their role. We want them to know that accountability is an awesome thing. It's not punitive. It's, hey, you're in this role because you've earned this role, and we believe you can do it at a really high level. And then transparency. There are no kind of ways to school the system, so to speak. We're going to have objective, fact-based conversations on what the data is telling us, and we're going to continue to improve. We're going to highlight issues early. We're going to see, did we set the goal in a bad spot? If we feel like we set the goal in a really good spot, well, we're only 30 days away, sometimes shorter, from seeing how far are we missing that. Bad things don't typically happen in 30-day cycles. They happen in 6 to 12-month cycles when we've not been doing things very well. It also allows the team to focus on progress rather than blame. You're going to see more collaboration amongst your team. If I know I'm responsible for a KPI that may in some way be connected to someone else's, I may self-police that a little bit and say, hey, let's work collaboratively on this, because neither one of us are going to be where we need to be. What systems can we put into place to communicate better, to build a better system here? And I think it's just monumentally important. We share this with every practice we work with. In every practice, there's a billion buttons that every month we can push to see what's going to happen. What we want to do is push just a couple of buttons at a time. We want to see what the downstream impact of that is, and then we want to adjust accordingly. We want to replace this idea that we're reacting to things in real time, and then ultimately we're going to see our culture get better. We're going to have higher engagement morale. Our turnover is probably going to go down, and the turnover we do have is probably really positive turnover. We're probably going to, for lack of a better word, weed out some of those team members who simply don't want this culture of accountability. It's going to stronger align with our practice goals. There's going to be less chaos. There's going to be less putting out fires. And ultimately, we're going to have more consistent execution. So with that, it was quick. It was a lot to take in. We thank you, obviously, for spending your afternoon with us. Matt and Eliza, thank you so much for putting these together. I appreciate the ability to speak with you guys. And as always, if we can help you all in any way moving forward, we're always happy to talk about these things. And we truly enjoy seeing you guys get better. So with that, take any questions you may have. And Matt, certainly turn it over to you for any kind of parting comments.
Thank you, Trevor. Your wisdom is appreciated, and definitely a lot of good insight. We did have that question come through. So it was, if you have 4 MAs, do you need 4 different job descriptions? If so, how do you handle the challenges with colleagues holding each other responsible for things? So, Trevor, I'll let you kind of address that.
Yeah, so great question. And certainly one of the takeaways we don't want from this presentation is every kind of job description. So again, thinking through that lane, there may be lanes within the practice that are either the exact same or very similar from a structural standpoint for multiple positions in a practice. Further, those KPIs may on paper also be exactly the same, but they're going to be to that individual. So we wouldn't necessarily look at, and clinical is a little bit trickier admittedly, than some of our business unit positions. But for the clinic, what we would look at is KPIs, but those are going to be to the specific person. They're going to work with their physician on that. They're going to work with the manager on that. But KPIs would be probably very similar in structure, but they would be down to the person. So we wouldn't necessarily track total patient volume for the clinic solely. We would also be looking at total patient volume by provider, and to the extent the medical assistants had some control over that, whether it's through room turnover, it's through scribing effectively, whatever they're doing within the practice, we'd want to define those as accurately as we could. But yeah, absolutely. There will be some job quote descriptions that are either the same or very similar within a practice.
Very good. Any other questions before we finish up this webinar portion of the monthly educational series? Right. Well, thank you.
No questions here, so nothing's been added.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Again, this is our webinar series. This will be occurring every month and a different topic every month. I sent you the blog in the chat, so feel free to read the blog. We'll be having this as a recording for you for future references. And then you will be receiving an email later this week regarding our workshop. We do limit that workshop to 15 people. It is a video on, microphone on, a collaborative roundtable that we host. Talking about the same topic. So we'll get some more wisdom from Trevor. If you like specific questions you have, we'll be talking about it in our workshop series, which will be on February 20th at 4 p.m. Eastern. Looking forward to seeing you guys there. But thank you, everybody, and thank you, Trevor.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Matt.